Sergeant Joe Friday, played by the one and only Jack Webb, was a fictional sleuth with a no-nonsense attitude who, both on the short-lived radio show and on the critically acclaimed TV series, tackled mysteries, took down baddies, and cracked tough cases in the streets of LA. Along the way, he had a set of rules he never wavered from, and they never let him down. One character Friday repeatedly sought the services of was a citizen by the name of Raymond Pinker. He was the chief forensic specialist for the LAPD, and unlike Joe, Pinker was actually based upon a real-world figure. The inspiration for that character came from a person who shared his same name. The real Raymond Pinker worked for the LAPD for 40 years. He helped solve crimes with his trusty magnifying glass and other tools of the trade in a fashion Sherlock Holmes would likely have been proud of. In this video, we're going to take a look at the real Raymond Pinker and how he unwittingly became a TV star. He actually worked on some pretty incredible cases, a couple of which you might even have heard about, but we'll get to that in a minute. It's pretty crazy Pinker has never received the recognition he deserves. You'd think Dragnet would have at least given him a credit, considering the fact that they outright stole his full name. They never paid him a penny. Dragnet used Pinker's name without ever consulting him or paying him for his contribution. He died many years ago, but his wife, Louise Pinker, was interviewed several years ago and was quoted as saying he never even received so much as a pack of Chesterfield cigarettes, the show's primary corporate sponsor. The real Pinker joined the LAPD back in 1929. He became a team member of the newly formed Scientific Investigation Division. Basically, he was a forensics analyst before that terminology was in use. The division had the first lab of its kind in the nation, even though at the time they only had a microscope, a Bunsen burner, and a couple of test tubes at their disposal. It was a far cry from the modern labs and equipment law enforcement uses today, but back then it was somewhat revolutionary. With Pinker's help, the ill-equipped lab was transformed into a nationally renowned facility. 60 experts were hired, and all the lab gear was modernized. His department became the model that other police departments from other major cities would look to for inspiration and pointers. Raymond Pinker was a pioneer. He was the first to use things like paraffin tests coupled with gamma rays to identify whether an assailant discharged a firearm. He was one of the very first to use color photography and 3D models to map out crime scenes. He also made use of breathalyzer and polygraph tests and instructed officers and attorneys on how to use them to assess and evaluate criminals. Dragnet's stories were based upon Pinker's cases. It's always curious when films or TV shows make the claim they're based upon a true story. It makes the viewer wonder just what elements of a fictionalized program are actually rooted in reality and what are fluff. In the case of Dragnet, many of the series' episodes were based upon Pinker's actual case files. Louise Pinker told the LA Times she and her husband would watch Dragnet and could determine exactly what cases the writers were drawing upon for inspiration. Many of the cases featured in the show cherry-picked various elements from multiple cases to make them more interesting. So while each individual case featured in Dragnet wasn't exactly a true story in the broadest sense, it's clear they were rooted in reality to at least some extent. It still stands to question why Pinker or his wife were never credited or compensated for their contributions. In today's litigious world, you could almost assuredly expect a long, drawn-out legal battle. But perhaps that wasn't a battle the real Raymond Pinker wanted to fight. The real Raymond Pinker. Pinker was born in Nebraska in 1905. He and his family moved to LA when he was still just an adolescent. He put himself through college at USC by working at a local drugstore. He received a degree in chemistry and always knew he wanted to work in law enforcement. He landed his first job out of college in 1929 working with the LAPD as a chemist. Just months after being hired, the stock market crashed. The police department was quite the spectacle to see at the time. There were rats the size of dogs that roamed the building. The walls were all stained yellow with cigarette smoke, and there were bullet holes scattered across the ceiling and walls from accidentally discharged weapons. But despite its dilapidated, run-down nature, it felt like home to Pinker. For decades, it would be the place he would put his curious and inquisitive mind to good use. Pinker is remembered as a quiet yet brilliant man who often kept to himself, except when he was engaged in his work, which took a major priority in his life. During his tenure, he helped put some of the most hardened and notorious criminals behind bars. One of the most infamous cases he cracked involved LAPD Police Captain Earl Kynette. He was the head of what was known as the Special Intelligence Squad. In 1938, Kynette was convicted of orchestrating a car bombing directed at another LAPD detective who was assigned to investigate alleged police corruption. It was all part of the job. Pinker would often receive phone calls in the middle of the night summoning him to go collect evidence at the scene of a crime. His services were in high demand. He was asked to sit in on many autopsies to help get a better understanding of how the victims died, but that was one part of the job he wasn't particularly fond of. According to his widow Ruby, when he'd come home from the morgue, he'd have to strip his clothes off before coming indoors, and would immediately jump in the shower to scrub the scent of death out of his skin and hair. He was called to the stand hundreds of times a year. Court became a regular part of his life, and he wouldn't let anything stop him from doing his job, even his family life. In 1938, when he was testifying in the Kynette corruption car bombing case, Judge Thomas Ambrose adjourned court early for the day and informed Pinker his wife had just given birth to a baby girl. Talk about being committed to your job, right? By the way, if you're enjoying this video so far, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Tap the bell icon to turn on notifications so you can keep up with all our latest videos. And make sure you keep watching to see some of the high-profile cases that Raymond Pinker worked on and what he did with his life after he retired.
Booking for 601.
The Louise Pete case. In 1944, Pinker cracked one of the biggest cases of his career. Louise Pete was a convicted murderer who was out on parole and had been suspected in the murder and robbery of another woman she had befriended years ago. Betty, the victim, even helped care for Pete's daughter while she spent 18 years in prison on her previous murder conviction. When Betty suddenly vanished and no body was recovered, Pinker was called in to try to get to the bottom of the matter. He found it strange that Pete had fresh flowers all through her house, but her garden, which had a brand new raised bed, was empty. If she liked flowers so much, why wasn't she growing any? Following Pinker's recommendation, the police dug up the bed and found Betty's body. Pete was executed via the gas chamber in 1947. The Black Dahlia case. Another famous case Pinker got a chance to work on was the notorious Black Dahlia case. In 1947, Pinker was able to determine that Elizabeth Short, the 22-year-old waitress who was the victim in the gruesome murder, had received several wounds while she was still alive. He found other clues about her personality by looking at her remains. He noted she must have had a poor support system by looking at her teeth. Her cavities were plugged with wax instead of having appropriate fillings. It was these little details that he called little signatures of disclosure that only the keen eye could find. It was this kind of intuitive detective work that made Pinker so good at his job. He saw what others might overlook. In many ways, he paved the way for future forensic analysts and pathologists, and laid the groundwork for countless TV shows that would feature characters that followed his modus operandi. Ray Pinker's later years. In 1955, the LAPD moved into a brand new $7 million headquarters building in what is presently called the Parker Center on Los Angeles Street. The new facility was equipped with $200,000 worth of specialized equipment. He had everything he could dream about at his fingertips, from spectrometers to centrifuges and all sorts of other top-notch chemistry equipment. He finally had a lab that matched his expertise. His inner child must have felt like he was in Disney World. He continued to work for the department until 1965, when, after nearly 4 decades, he left and started teaching forensic science at Cal State. He passed away in 1979 at the age of 74. It's rather fascinating that a fictional character in a TV show was actually a real person. While Joe Friday may not be real, Raymond Pinker seems like one amazing person. Do you think the producers of Dragnet should have compensated him and his family for making use of his likeness in cases for the show? Or do you think it was all fair game for NBC to use? Let us know what you think in the comments section. And before you go, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Tap the bell icon to turn on notifications so you can catch all our latest facts-packed videos.